The kitchen table was still set for breakfast. 3 bowls arranged in perfect alignment, spoons resting beside them at identical angles. A carton of milk stood in the center, unopened, its expiration date still 3 days away. The chairs were pushed back slightly, as if their occupants had simply stepped away for a moment and planned to return. But no one had sat at that table in 36 hours, and the silence in the house had grown so thick that when Detective Sarah Chen first walked through the unlocked front door that Tuesday morning, she could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. The home belonged to the Morrison family. David, age 42, his wife Rebecca, 38, and their daughter Emma, just 7 years old. They lived on Maple Ridge Drive in the quiet suburb of Westfield, Connecticut, a street where neighbors knew each other's names, and children rode bicycles until dusk. This was not the kind of place where families disappeared. This was not the kind of place where anything happened at all. Yet the Morrisons were gone, and they had left behind a scene so ordinary, so utterly mundane, that it became immediately extraordinary. Because people who plan to leave don't set tables for meals they'll never eat. People who flee in panic don't lock the back door and arm the security system. And people who vanish against their will don't usually take the time to hang up wet towels in the bathroom or leave a load of clean laundry folded on the bed. Detective Chen stood in that kitchen and felt the first cold finger of dread trace its way down her spine. She had worked missing persons cases for 17 years. She knew the patterns, the probabilities, the grim statistics that separated the found from the lost. But this case, from its very first moments, felt different. This case felt wrong. The Morrison family had been a fixture of Westfield for nearly a decade. David worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm in Hartford, the kind of steady, unremarkable job that provided a comfortable middle-class life without attracting attention. He drove a silver Honda Civic, attended parent-teacher conferences, and coached Emma's soccer team on weekends. Neighbors described him as quiet, pleasant, the sort of man who waved when he got the mail but rarely stopped for lengthy conversations. Rebecca Morrison was more socially engaged. She volunteered at the local library, organized bake sales for Emma's school, and maintained an active presence in the neighborhood Facebook group where she posted pictures of sunsets and asked for recommendations for plumbers and pediatricians. Emma was by all accounts a bright, happy child, a second grader who loved drawing horses and had recently lost her 2 front teeth. She wore her hair in braids and carried a purple backpack covered in unicorn stickers. She was ordinary. They were all ordinary. That was what made their disappearance so profoundly unsettling. The timeline of their vanishing began on Sunday evening, October 15th, when multiple neighbors saw the Morrisons return home from what appeared to be a family outing. David pulled the Honda into the driveway at approximately 6:30 p.m. Rebecca was in the passenger seat, and Emma was visible in the back, her face pressed against the window as she waved to Mrs. Patterson, who lived 3 houses down and was watering her garden. Mrs. Patterson would later tell investigators that nothing seemed unusual about the family's demeanor. They looked like any family coming home after a weekend afternoon away, perhaps slightly tired but content. David carried a small grocery bag into the house. Rebecca held Emma's hand as they walked up the front path. The door closed behind them at 6:33 p.m. according to Mrs. Patterson, who checked her watch because her roast needed to come out of the oven in 20 minutes. That was the last confirmed sighting of the Morrison family. At 7:15 p.m., Rebecca posted on the neighborhood Facebook group. The message was brief and unremarkable. "Does anyone have a good recipe for chicken pot pie? Looking to try something new this week?" 3 neighbors responded with suggestions. Rebecca never replied to any of them. At 8:05 p.m., David's cell phone received a text message from his brother Marcus, asking about plans for Thanksgiving, which was still 6 weeks away. The message was never opened, never read. At 8:47 p.m., a light turned off in Emma's bedroom window. The room faced the street, and 2 different neighbors noticed the change. The house went dark except for a single light in the downstairs hallway, a nightlight that stayed illuminated on a timer. Nothing else. No sounds, no movement, no signs of life. Monday morning arrived with its ordinary rhythms. School buses rumbled through the neighborhood. Dogs barked. Coffee makers burbled in kitchens up and down Maple Ridge Drive. But Emma Morrison did not board the bus that stopped at the corner of Maple and Oak at 7:50 a.m. The driver, a woman named Linda Kowalski, who had driven that route for 14 years, noticed the absence immediately. Emma had perfect attendance. She was always waiting at the corner with her purple unicorn backpack, always ready 5 minutes early. When Emma failed to appear, Linda assumed the child was sick. She drove on. At the Morrison house, the newspaper remained on the driveway. The mail began to accumulate in the box. David did not arrive at his office in Hartford, and when his assistant called at 9:30 a.m. to ask if he was running late, the call went to voicemail. Rebecca missed her volunteer shift at the library that afternoon. Emma's teacher marked her absent. In isolation, these were not alarming details. People got sick, emergencies happened. But taken together, they formed a pattern that someone should have noticed sooner. If you're watching this and you're already trying to piece together what might have happened to the Morrison family, I want to ask you to do something right now. Hit that like button, because it helps more people discover cases like this one. Mysteries that deserve attention, families that deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because we dive deep into true crime cases that haunt investigators and communities. Cases where the answers aren't easy and the truth remains elusive. And most importantly, leave a comment below with your theory. What do you think happened to David, Rebecca, and Emma Morrison? Do you believe they left voluntarily? Do you think someone took them? Or is there something else, something we're not seeing, that explains how an entire family can vanish from a locked house in a quiet suburb? Share your thoughts. Let's try to solve this together. It wasn't until Tuesday morning that concern crystallized into genuine alarm. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Williamson, called the Morrison home 3 times before contacting the school administration. The principal attempted to reach Rebecca's cell phone and David's work number. Both efforts failed. A guidance counselor, following protocol for unexplained absences, drove to the Morrison house at 11 a.m. She knocked, she rang the doorbell. She peered through windows and saw nothing that suggested distress. No overturned furniture, no signs of struggle. Just a house that looked like its occupants had stepped out and would return at any moment. She left a note on the door and reported the situation to the local police. Detective Sarah Chen arrived at the Morrison residence at 2:15 p.m. on Tuesday, 43 hours after the family was last seen. She had expected to find a simple explanation. A last-minute trip, a family emergency that had pulled them away without time for notifications. She had prepared herself to feel slightly foolish for responding to what would likely turn out to be a miscommunication. Instead, she found a mystery that would consume the next 2 years of her life and leave scars on Westfield that have never fully healed. The house was locked, every door, every window secured. Jen obtained permission from the landlord. The Morrisons rented the property and let herself in through the front entrance. The security system beeped its warning tone, indicating it had been armed when the family left, or when someone left. Jen disarmed it using the code provided by the property management company. Then she stepped into the hallway and felt that immediate instinctive wrongness that separates an ordinary scene from something inexplicable. Nothing was disturbed. That was the first thing Chen noted in her official report, and it was the detail that would haunt every subsequent investigator. In cases of foul play, there are almost always signs, evidence of struggle, items knocked over, valuables taken, doors forced. In cases of hurried departure, there's chaos, drawers left open, belongings scattered, the unmistakable signature of panic. But the Morrison house showed neither pattern. It was pristine. The living room held a couch with throw pillows arranged symmetrically, a coffee table with 3 coasters and a remote control, a bookshelf organized by height. Emma's toys were in a basket in the corner. A stack of bills sat on the kitchen counter, sorted and clipped together, waiting to be paid. The sink was empty. The trash had been taken out. Upstairs, beds were made. Clothes hung in closets. Toothbrushes rested in the bathroom holder. 3 of them, 2 adult-sized and 1 child's. each in its designated slot. But certain things were missing, and these absences told their own cryptic story. David's wallet was gone, Rebecca's purse was gone, Emma's purple backpack was gone. All 3 cell phones were gone. These items suggested intention, planning, the deliberate choice to take what one would need for an outing or a trip. Yet other essential items remained behind. Rebecca's laptop sat open on the dining room table, still plugged in, its screen dark. David's car keys hung on a hook by the door. The Honda Civic remained in the driveway. A suitcase that neighbors confirmed the family used for travel sat in the hall closet. Emma's favorite stuffed animal, a worn rabbit named Mr. Hoppy that she reportedly took everywhere, lay on her bed. The medicine cabinet held prescription medications for both David and Rebecca. Thyroid medication, blood pressure pills. Nothing unusual, but nothing you'd leave behind if you were planning to be gone for more than a day or two. Chen walked through the house 3 times that first afternoon, documenting everything, trying to understand the logic of what she was seeing. The partial nature of the absence suggested a short trip, but the duration of the disappearance contradicted that. The secured house suggested normalcy, but the family's total silence contradicted that. Every answer raised new questions. Every detail fit multiple contradictory narratives. It was like trying to assemble a puzzle where the pieces came from different boxes, where nothing quite aligned no matter how you arranged it. The investigation began in earnest that evening. Police established a timeline using cell phone records, security camera footage from nearby businesses, and witness statements from neighbors. The picture that emerged was both detailed and utterly unhelpful. The Morrisons' phones last pinged towers near their home on Sunday evening. David's phone went dark at 8:17 p.m. Rebecca's at 8:23 p.m. Emma didn't have her own phone, but the 2 adult devices going offline within 6 minutes of each other suggested either dead batteries, unlikely for both simultaneously, or phones being deliberately powered down. No calls were made, no texts sent after Rebecca's Facebook post. The devices simply ceased to exist on the network, as if they had been erased from reality. Security cameras from a convenience store 2 blocks away showed the Morrisons' Honda passing by at 6:23 p.m. on Sunday evening, heading toward their house. This matched Mrs. Patterson's account of their arrival, but no cameras captured the car leaving again. No footage showed the family on foot. Investigators canvassed a 3-mile radius around the Morrison home, checking every business, every traffic camera, every doorbell security system. The family had somehow departed without being recorded, which in the modern age of ubiquitous surveillance was almost harder to explain than the disappearance itself. Interviews with friends and extended family revealed no obvious motive for voluntary disappearance. David's brother Marcus insisted the family had been happy, stable, looking forward to the holidays. He described David as a devoted father, a reliable brother, someone who called their elderly mother every Sunday without fail. Rebecca's sister, Jennifer, who lived in Massachusetts, said she had spoken with Rebecca just 3 days before the disappearance. They had discussed Emma's upcoming birthday party, planned for the following month. Rebecca had been excited, already shopping for decorations. She had sent Jennifer a picture of a unicorn cake pan she'd found. Jennifer couldn't reconcile that enthusiasm with the idea that Rebecca was planning to vanish 3 days later. Financial records showed nothing suspicious. The Morrisons lived comfortably but modestly. They had a small savings account, no unusual debts, no large withdrawals in the days before they disappeared. David's paycheck deposited automatically every 2 weeks. Rebecca did freelance graphic design work from home, earning enough to cover incidental expenses. Their bank accounts remained untouched after Sunday evening. Credit cards showed no activity. If they had left voluntarily, they had done so with only the cash they carried in their wallets, later estimated at probably less than $200 total. David's employer confirmed he had shown no signs of stress or unusual behavior in the weeks before his disappearance. He had submitted his weekly reports on time, attended all scheduled meetings, and given no indication he was planning to take time off. His computer at work showed no suspicious searches. no research into new identities or ways to disappear. Rebecca's browser history at home revealed typical suburban mom searches: recipes, school supply sales, local events for children. The most unusual thing investigators found was a series of searches about national parks in Utah. But Rebecca had explained to friends that she wanted to plan a family vacation for the following summer. Nothing suggested imminent flight. The police did what police do in missing persons cases. They dug into the family's background, looking for secrets, for cracks in the facade of normalcy. They interviewed co-workers, neighbors, Emma's teacher, David's soccer team parents. They searched for enemies, for financial problems, for affairs, for anything that might explain why a family would vanish or why someone would want them gone. They found nothing. The Morrisons were, by every measure, exactly what they appeared to be: an ordinary family living an ordinary life, in an ordinary house, on an ordinary street. Yet they were gone. And the ordinariness of their lives made their absence more disturbing, not less. Because if the Morrisons could disappear, then anyone could. If there was no warning, no reason, no logical explanation, then the very concept of safety became an illusion. The people of Westfield began to understand this in the days following the discovery, and the understanding changed them in ways both subtle and profound. The first major theory to gain traction was voluntary disappearance, that the Morrisons had, for reasons known only to themselves, chosen to leave their lives behind. This theory had appeal because it meant the family might still be alive, might still be together somewhere, starting over. Proponents pointed to the missing phones, the missing wallet and purse, the armed security system. These were the actions of people who intended to leave, who had made a choice. Perhaps David was running from something: debt, legal trouble, a threat no one else knew about. Perhaps Rebecca had grown tired of suburban life and convinced her husband to flee with her. Perhaps they had joined a cult or fallen under the influence of someone who promised them something better. But this theory crumbled under scrutiny. People who disappear voluntarily almost always make mistakes. They use credit cards. They access bank accounts. They slip up and contact loved ones. They appear on camera eventually somewhere, because total invisibility in the modern world requires resources and planning that the Morrisons simply didn't have. Moreover, people who choose to disappear usually leave behind clues of dissatisfaction, complaints to friends, changes in behavior, some indication that their current life had become unbearable. The Morrisons showed none of these signs. And most damningly, people who disappear voluntarily rarely take their 7-year-old daughter with them. Because removing a child from school, from friends, from the only life she's known, is an act of profound cruelty that doesn't align with being described as loving, attentive parents. The second theory was darker: foul play. Someone had come to the Morrison house Sunday evening. Someone who either knew the family well enough to gain entry without force, or who had convinced them to leave willingly. This someone had taken the family to a secondary location where terrible things had occurred, and the bodies had been hidden so well that despite extensive searches of nearby woods, abandoned buildings and waterways, nothing had ever been found. This theory accounted for the sudden silence of the phones, the lack of financial activity, the complete absence of the family from all records and surveillance. It explained why they never contacted anyone again, why they never resurfaced. But this theory had its own problems. There was no evidence of struggle in the house, no blood, no signs of violence, nothing disturbed. Forensic teams went through the Morrison home with luminol and presumptive blood tests. They found nothing suspicious, just the ordinary biological traces of a family living their lives. The backyard showed no signs of digging. Cadaver dogs found no hits. If someone had killed the Morrisons, they had done so without leaving a single drop of blood, without disturbing a single piece of furniture, and had managed to transport 3 bodies, including that of an adult man, without anyone seeing anything. The logistics seemed nearly impossible. A third theory emerged from a more careful reading of the family's dynamics. Perhaps Rebecca had been the architect of the disappearance. Perhaps she had been unhappy, trapped, desperate to escape, and she had convinced David to flee with her. Or perhaps she had taken Emma and run, and David had followed. This theory gained some traction when investigators discovered that Rebecca had experienced postpartum depression after Emma's birth, though she had been successfully treated and had shown no signs of current mental health crisis. It gained more traction when someone remembered that Rebecca's father had been physically abusive, that she had grown up in a household marked by violence, and perhaps those old traumas had resurfaced in ways that made her current life unbearable. But again, the evidence didn't quite fit. Rebecca's friends and therapists, she had seen a counselor briefly years earlier, all insisted she had processed her childhood trauma, had built a good life, had been genuinely happy. Her sister Jennifer was adamant that Rebecca would never have taken Emma away from the family, would never have deprived her daughter of grandparents and aunts and uncles who loved her. And even if Rebecca had wanted to disappear, even if she had somehow convinced David to go along with it, where had they gone? How had they survived without money, without access to their resources? Then there were the stranger theories, the ones that gained traction on internet forums and true crime podcasts, but that investigators could never quite dismiss because nothing else made sense either. One theory suggested that David had been involved in something illegal, perhaps embezzlement, perhaps witness to a crime, and that the family had entered witness protection. But the FBI confirmed they had no such family in their programs, and David's financials showed no evidence of hidden money or criminal activity. Another theory proposed that the family had been abducted by human traffickers, though this seemed wildly implausible for a suburban Connecticut family snatched from their own home with no witnesses and no ransom demands. The most haunting theory, the one that Detective Chen found herself returning to in the small hours of sleepless nights, was that the Morrisons had somehow fallen through a crack in the world. Not literally, of course, but through some confluence of circumstances so specific and so unlikely that no one had anticipated it and no one could reconstruct it after the fact. Perhaps they had gone for a walk that evening and encountered someone, a drifter, a disturbed individual, someone passing through who had no connection to Westfield and left no trace. Perhaps they had gotten into a car accident in a remote area, and the vehicle had gone into water or over an embankment where it would never be found. Perhaps a series of small, unremarkable decisions had led them to a place where catastrophe waited, and we would never know the path because we couldn't see the connections. The psychological impact of the Morrison disappearance rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Westfield had been a place where people left their doors unlocked, where children played outside until dark, where the greatest fears were of traffic accidents or house fires, ordinary tragedies with understandable causes. The Morrisons shattered that sense of security. If a family could vanish from their own home with no warning and no explanation, then nowhere was safe. Nothing was certain. Parents began keeping their children inside. Home security system sales increased 40% in the month after the disappearance. Neighbors who had waved pleasantly to each other for years began to wonder what secrets might hide behind those waves, what darkness might lurk in the houses they passed every day. Mrs. Patterson, who had waved to Emma that last evening, began attending therapy sessions for anxiety. She couldn't shake the feeling that she should have noticed something, should have seen something wrong in that final interaction. She replayed the memory obsessively, Emma's face pressed against the car window, her small hand waving, searching for some sign she had missed, some clue that would make sense of the inexplicable. Detective Chen worked the case for 18 months before other assignments pulled her attention away. In that time, she followed hundreds of leads. She interviewed over 200 people. She reviewed thousands of hours of security footage, checked missing persons databases across the country, coordinated with FBI analysts who specialized in familial abductions. She found nothing. Every lead evaporated. Every promising tip led to dead ends. The investigation generated a file cabinet full of reports and exactly 0 answers. The case went cold not with a bang, but with a slow, inevitable silence. Media attention faded as other stories took precedence. The initial flood of tips dried to a trickle, then stopped altogether. The FBI eventually closed its active investigation, though the file remained technically open. Westfield moved on because it had to, because life continued whether or not the Morrisons were ever found. But the case remained a wound in the community's collective consciousness. A reminder that some questions have no answers, that some losses leave only absence. Over the years, there have been occasional developments, moments when the case briefly resurfaces before sinking back into obscurity. 3 years after the disappearance, a hiker in the Berkshire Mountains found a child's purple backpack wedged between rocks near a stream. It had unicorn stickers on it. DNA testing confirmed it had belonged to Emma Morrison. The discovery prompted a massive search of the surrounding area, teams of volunteers combing through miles of dense forest. They found nothing else. No other belongings, no remains. No explanation for how the backpack had ended up 200 miles from Westfield. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. Had the family been there? Had someone else taken the backpack there? Was it planted evidence or a genuine clue? No one knew. 5 years after the disappearance, a woman in Oregon contacted police claiming to have seen Rebecca Morrison at a farmer's market in Portland. She said the woman had the same distinctive scar on her left forearm that Rebecca had, the result of a childhood burn. Investigators flew to Oregon, reviewed security footage from the market, interviewed vendors. They found a woman who looked somewhat like Rebecca Morrison, but DNA from a coffee cup she had discarded didn't match. The sighting was classified as mistaken identity, one of dozens of similar reports that had come in over the years, none of which led anywhere concrete. 7 years after the disappearance, a cold case unit re-examined the Morrison file using new forensic techniques. They retested evidence from the house, used updated software to analyze the timeline, consulted with experts in criminal psychology and victimology. Their conclusion, after 6 months of intensive review, was that the original investigation had been thorough and that no new evidence or analysis changed the fundamental mystery. The Morrisons had vanished without leaving behind enough clues to reconstruct their fate. The case was closed again, though once more it remained technically open, waiting for that one piece of evidence that might finally explain everything. Today, the house on Maple Ridge Drive is occupied by a new family. They know the history. It's impossible to rent or buy a house in Westfield without learning about the Morrisons. But they live there anyway because life is for the living, and houses are just structures of wood and nails that hold whatever meaning we assign to them. Emma Morrison would be 17 now if she's still alive. David would be 52, Rebecca 48. They would have aged, changed, become different versions of themselves. Or they would be gone, their bodies resting in some undiscovered place, their story finished on that October evening, when they walked into their house for the last time. The truth about what happened to the Morrison family remains locked away somewhere in the dark spaces between what we know and what we can prove. Perhaps they made a choice we don't understand, driven by forces we can't see, and they're living new lives under new names in a place where no one knows to look for them. Perhaps they encountered evil that night, someone or something that destroyed them so completely that not even their bones would tell the tale. Perhaps the answer is something stranger still, something that doesn't fit any category we have words for, something that exists in the realm of the inexplicable. What haunts investigators, what keeps Detective Chen awake some nights even now, years after she moved on to other cases, isn't just the absence of answers. It's the presence of all those small, ordinary details that make the Morrison house a perfect snapshot of a life interrupted. The milk on the table, the folded laundry, the bills waiting to be paid. These objects speak to intention, to a future that the Morrisons expected to have, to plans that would never be fulfilled. Somewhere in the gap between those expectations and the reality of their disappearance lies the truth, but the gap has proven too wide to bridge. The scariest thing about the Morrison case isn't what we know. It's what we've learned about the limits of knowing itself, about how completely a family can be erased from existence, about how our assumption that every mystery has a solution might itself be the greatest mystery of all. The Morrisons vanished overnight and left no trace except for the questions that will outlive everyone who remembers them. Questions that echo in the empty rooms of their former home, and in the minds of everyone who has tried and failed to understand where they went and why. In the end, we're left with only certainties about what we don't have. We don't have bodies. We don't have witnesses. We don't have confessions or evidence or explanations. We have only absence, and the terrible knowledge that absence proves nothing except its own existence. The Morrisons are gone. That is the only truth we possess, and it is both everything and nothing at all.